I've been with the same volunteer search and rescue team in northern Montana for 11 years. Long enough that I've stopped being surprised by most of what the wilderness sends back to us. Before this, I did 2 seasons with the county fire department and a stint of doing trail maintenance for the Park Service, which is how I learned this stretch of terrain well enough to be useful in the dark. The work is physical and mostly predictable. Dehydration, exposure, sprained ankles, the occasional broken leg from someone who misjudged a slope and committed to the mistake before they could take it back. Hunters who wander past their marked zone and lose the light and end up cold and embarrassed. We find them and bring them out. That's the job 90% of the time. The other 10% is the reason I'm writing this down. 3 Sundays ago, we got a call from a trail runner who'd spotted a man on the Corey Creek access path. That trail hasn't been in official use for close to 15 years. A bridge washed out in 2010, and the funding to replace it never materialized. So the trailhead marker went dark, and it dropped off the Park Service map. People who know this area know it's still walkable if you're careful about where the ground gets soft near the creek. People who don't know this area have no business being on it. And if they are, it's usually because something went wrong somewhere else first. The runner said that the man was barefoot, moving slow, headed down, dressed for hunting in temperatures that had dropped a long way since morning. She called out to him twice, and he hadn't looked up. My partner, Denise, and I took the Corey Creek approach on foot because the growth had reclaimed enough of the trail that the ATV wasn't a practical option. It's a long mile from the trailhead to where we found him. Mostly uphill, and the overgrowth meant we had to watch our footing and the path at the same time. We heard him before we saw him. The snow in that area was deep enough that footsteps carry, and we heard his shuffle and catch gait for about 60 yards before we came around the bend and had eyes on him. He was moving in the wrong direction, deeper into the wilderness, away from the trailhead, away from anything. His hunting jacket had been opened along the back in vertical strips. I say open because shredding implies speed and randomness, and whatever had happened to that jacket looked deliberate, like someone needed access to the seam and dealt with the material accordingly. His feet were bare in about 8 inches of packed snow, and the frostbite on them was visible from a distance. There was blood on his forearms and on the front of his jacket, and none of it appeared to be coming from any wound I could locate on him from where I stood. I noticed that and did not mention it to Denise. When I looked over at her, I could see from her face that she'd already registered it. We got him turned around without resistance. He didn't fight us, and he didn't respond to us in any normal sense. He wasn't tracking our questions or reacting to our presence specifically, just accepted the gentle physical pressure of being redirected. the way a very tired person will accept being guided to a chair. He muttered something under his breath the entire walk back, low and rhythmic, running under the sound of the wind and the creak of the snow under our boots. It took me most of that 1.25 miles to parse it out clearly. It let me go. It let me go. It let me go. Steady as breathing, the whole way out. We got him into the med tent at the base of camp around 2 in the afternoon. Denise started working on the frostbite while I tried to get basic information. Name, point of origin, how long he'd been out, and who else was with him. He wouldn't answer any of it. He sat on the cot and looked at the canvas wall with the focused attention of someone reading text that was only visible to him. And his mouth had stopped moving, and the muttering had stopped. And something about the silence felt more unsettling than the muttering had. His feet were bad. Denise had concerns about tissue damage on 2 of the toes of his left foot, and she radioed the county coordinator for a medical consult while she got him into dry socks and a thermal layer. He complied with all of it without speaking, lifted his feet when directed, held his arm out, followed basic physical instructions. But he was somewhere else while he did it. Whatever was running his body through those motions wasn't fully present in the tent with us. Around 4 in the afternoon, one of the other volunteers, a woman named Karen who'd been doing this for 6 years, brought over a protein bar and a cup of broth she'd gotten from the camp stove. He looked at the food and turned his face away, his lips pressed together. Karen slid the broth closer, doing the patient insistence you learn to do with people in shock. And he grabbed the edge of the folding table with both hands and screamed. A single, sustained note, loud enough that I heard someone outside the tent go quiet. Then, very quietly, and without looking at any of us, he said, "It will know." We removed the food and did not offer it again. At 7 o'clock, Denise and 5 members of the team went north to respond to a snowmobile incident. 2 people stranded, 1 possible fracture, 6 miles out. That left me and the man, and a single camp lantern and the sound of the wind working at the canvas seams. Which, as a sound, you stop noticing after a while, unless something makes you notice it again. I sat in the folding chair across from his cot. He was sitting up straight, hands folded in his lap, his spine carrying a posture that was incongruous with the condition of the rest of him. I didn't speak. 11 years of this work teaches you that silence is sometimes the only tool with any traction. After maybe 20 minutes, maybe a little longer, I had stopped checking my watch. He said, "You want to know what happened?" I said yes. He looked at me for the first time. His eyes had the desiccated quality that comes from not blinking enough over a long period of time. The specific dryness that sits at the uncomfortable edge of what a face can look like and still function. His focus was present, pointed, but aimed at something behind the plane of my face rather than at me. He told me his name was Derek. Said it once and didn't use it again during the whole conversation. He'd come up with 2 other men he'd hunted with for years. Tom Garish, who he'd known for close to a decade, and a man named Caleb, whose last name he either didn't offer or didn't know. I genuinely couldn't tell which. 3 men, 2 weeks, a cabin set up northeast of any marked trail in legal hunting ground, properly permitted. He'd made this trip, or a version of it, 4 times in the past decade without incident. The first 4 days were fine, he said. Good weather, good shooting, unremarkable. On the 5th night, Tom woke them up. Tom had been lying awake for an hour before he said anything. He heard something at the edge of camp. A steady, circular movement around the perimeter. Deliberate. An orbit that held its radius with a consistency that hunger doesn't produce in animals, and that wind doesn't produce in undergrowth. Tom told them afterward that while he was lying there, listening, some part of him had understood that he shouldn't break the silence. He hadn't been able to say why. He lay in his bag, listening for a long time before he finally reached over and woke Caleb, because the decision to not wake them had stopped feeling like a restraint and had started feeling like something else, like he was participating in something by staying quiet. The 3 of them had looked toward the tree line. Derek didn't describe what they saw. He went still for a moment, then said, very flatly, that they had looked, and then they had built their fire up higher, and they hadn't spoken again until morning. In the daylight, with the cool air coming in under the tent flaps, and the birds going in the canopy, they'd managed to discuss it at a distance. Hypotheticals, explanations, the various large animals native to that part of Montana. The conversation people have when the alternative is saying clearly what they're actually thinking. Tom didn't wake up the next morning. His sleeping bag was still zipped. The tent mesh on his side was latched from the inside. The fabric on all sides unbroken. Tom was simply gone from inside a closed space, and the only thing that remained was his tongue. Removed cleanly and placed flat on top of his sleeping bag, swollen with cold, laid there with a deliberateness that left no room for any other interpretation. Derek said they tried to leave that morning. Caleb went for the GPS unit and found it disassembled. The components separated and organized. The batteries removed and arranged in a line next to the shell. He said this bothered him more than the tongue, and he said it in a way that suggested he'd thought about the ordering of those reactions and understood something about himself from it. The tongue was terrible. The batteries in a line implied that whatever had arranged them had time and interest and a preference for order. Caleb's rifle had been bent. Derek used that exact word, bent, more than once. Left outside the tent overnight, and found in the morning in a configuration that a rifle frame doesn't achieve through any natural process. He said bent in the way someone says a word they've been working with for a while, wearing it down, trying to get it to mean what happened. They walked south by compass for 6 hours and came back to the camp. He said this without elaboration, and I didn't ask for any. He said he knew, by that point, that they wouldn't be leaving on their own timeline. He didn't explain how he'd arrived at this. He just said he knew and moved forward in the account, and the way he said it made asking feel beside the point. The second night without Tom, something came and sat at the edge of the firelight. He described it in the same flat, careful voice he'd been using throughout the conversation. Something tall, he said, and then paused for long enough that I thought he might not continue. Very thin. The proportions were wrong in a way that he could see but struggled to assign specific language to. Limbs that suggested a joint structure that his visual vocabulary didn't have a category for. An arrangement of the body's architecture that implied a skeleton with different priorities than the one he was used to looking at. A face with the right features in approximately the right positions, but the distance between them were off in a way that his eyes kept trying to correct and couldn't. He said the teeth were visible from across the fire, without the thing doing anything to make them visible. And then he stopped, like he'd gotten to the edge of what description was capable of doing. It sat there for close to 2 hours. He and Caleb kept the fire high and held still, and the thing across the fire held still too. And at some point, around 3 in the morning, Derek blinked, and when he opened his eyes, the space across from the fire was empty. He described this as a frame cut from a film reel, the space where something had been, without any interval of departure between its presence and its absence. Caleb was gone by the next morning. He heard him go. The tent zipper, the footsteps in the snow moving away from the camp. And then, somewhere out past the tree line in the dark, he heard Caleb's voice, laughing. He said it was Caleb's laughter in a technical sense. The pitch and the rhythm were right. The frequency was correct. But something had been evacuated from it. The way a voice recording of the same voice, but the air pressure behind it, is missing. He said the silence the laugh left behind in the tent felt different afterward. Like it had a texture in the air it hadn't had before. He offered this detail and then went quiet and looked at his hands. After Caleb, he ran. He moved for what he estimated was 3 days without stopping to sleep. though he said after a while this estimate started losing meaning. He ate nothing. He drank snow when he could get it. He walked with the rifle across his shoulders because it was useless as a rifle, and he needed something familiar to hold with both hands. There was something that reached him as he walked. He was specific that this was the shape directed meaning makes in the air. Pressure without content. Something communicating toward him without using a language to do it. And images came to him, unbidden and complete. His house, his daughter's face, the specific way she hummed while she was reading. A room he didn't recognize, dark and warm, where the floor gave slightly underfoot in a way that felt like standing on something that was also standing on you. He woke up one morning on the ground, with no memory of lying down. When he opened his eyes, the thing was there at the tree line, watching him from about 40 or 50 feet away. Between them, in the snow, was a line where pieces of Tom and Caleb arranged from nearest to farthest. He looked at the ground between himself and the thing, and he did not look at the pieces carefully. He said this matter-of-factly and moved on. The thing stepped toward him and stood over him, and he couldn't move, and it did something that was not speech. He said it was the way he imagined a radio frequency might feel if you could feel frequencies rather than just receive them. Something pressing against the inside of his skull that shaped itself into language the way heat shapes itself into light. Simple and complete, and present in the bones before the mind caught up to it.
You're already mine.
Then it stepped aside. He stood up and walked south, and he kept walking until we found him. The lantern had burned low while he talked. I hadn't thought to check the fuel, and the light had gone orange and uneven, throwing shadows across the canvas with more movement than the flames should have been able to generate. I sat across from him in the bad light and didn't say anything for a moment. He said,
You think I'm describing an animal?
I told him I didn't know what I was thinking yet, which was true. He pressed 2 fingers against the center of his sternum, gently, the way you'd show someone where a bruise was. He looked at his own chest while he said it.
It followed me back. It's in here now.
I went to sleep that night in my own tent and stared at the roof for a long time with my hands at my sides and my eyes open. He was gone in the morning. The med tent was sealed from the interior, the zip latched, and the closure pulled tight from the inside in a way that takes 2 hands and deliberate effort. The mesh window on the side panel was intact and latched. I spent 20 minutes examining the whole structure from outside and then from inside, and I could not find a mechanism by which a person had left it. The canvas was uncut. The stakes were still set. There was no physical account I could work out by looking at what was in front of me. The cot was wet. The sleeping bag and the surface of the cot beneath it were cold and damp in a way I could not attribute to condensation or sweat or any reasonable environmental cause. The overnight temperature had been well below freezing. The sky had been clear, and the dampness had a quality to it that I kept returning to as I stood there looking at it. Cold past the ambient temperature of the tent. Wet without an originating source. Like the space had been occupied by something that left a residue of itself when it vacated. I wrote the full incident report that afternoon and filed it with the county coordinator. Flagged the unusual elements. The county said they'd follow up on the missing persons angle and asked me to preserve the physical evidence in the med tent, which I did. We set 3 motion cameras on the south and east perimeters and doubled the watch rotations. I told the team we were operating on the assumption the man might return and that if anyone saw him, they should radio immediately and hold position. A trail of boot prints in the snow ran from the backside of the med tent toward the south tree line. Bare feet. The same absent tread pattern as when we'd found him. The stride length was wrong, too long for walking. The spacing between the prints suggested a pace that didn't correspond to any normal gait I could identify. We followed them for about 80 yards before tree cover thickened and the snow thinned under the canopy, and then there was nothing more to follow. The days between that morning and what happened to Paul had a particular quality to them. The camp ran its functions, call responses, equipment checks, shift rotations, and the team was professional and kept working. But there was a change in how people moved around the south and east sides of the perimeter. Smaller groups, faster transitions between structures. Nobody said anything about it directly. I noticed that the tree line looked different for me at night. The same tree line I'd been looking at for years. The same silhouette of spruce and pine against whatever the sky was doing. But my eyes processed it differently after Derek, looking for interruptions in the vertical pattern, for something tall among the tall things that were holding still in a way that trees weren't. 4 nights after the empty cot, Paul Emberg went missing. Paul was 26, 2 seasons with us, drove 3 hours each rotation, and never complained about the shifts nobody else wanted. He was on the east perimeter watch, midnight to 3, and at 2:50, his radio went quiet. When the next shift came out to relieve him at 3, the east perimeter was empty. We found him in the tree line at first light. I'm going to leave the details out of this account. There's a complete incident report filed with the county, and the relevant authorities have what they need. What I'll say is this. It looked like the same logic that had placed Tom's tongue on his sleeping bag, applied with more time and more intention. Something that was attempting a kind of communication through arrangement, and that was getting better at it. We pulled the camera footage that morning. The east perimeter camera showed a clean recording until 1:13 a.m., when the footage became static. The file itself was intact. The timestamp continued. The recording didn't corrupt or terminate. The camera was functional throughout. What it captured for 8 minutes was simply noise. In the last clean frame before the static began, the tree line at the edge of the infrared range was empty. In the first clean frame after the static resolved, there were 2 figures. The larger one was at the back, in the trees. Wrong proportions. The way Derek had described it, which was also the same way I'd been looking at the tree line all night, resolved into something I could now put an image to. The smaller figure was closer to the camera. Derek, in the same shredded jacket, his head tilted back, and his mouth open, and his shoulders raised and angled in a way that didn't fit the mechanics of shoulders without something else involved. Something pressing outward from inside the jacket that hadn't been there before. We broke down camp the next morning. Everyone knew it was the right call. The team lead, Davis, coordinated the vehicles, and most of the equipment was packed and out by early afternoon. Davis took the last load with his truck around 2 o'clock. What remained was maybe an hour of work, the last of the fixed rigging, some cabling, and the meat locker. I was the last one there. The late afternoon light in northern Montana at that time of year had a particular quality. Low angle, slightly amber, making distances look shorter than they are, and outlines look more solid. The camp, in various stages of being disassembled, looked like something abandoned rather than something being systematically removed. The outlines of where tents had been pressed into the snow, the poles still standing without their canvas, and the flattened areas where equipment had sat. I went through the last of the rigging and broke it down and logged it against the manifest. Walked the perimeter once to make sure nothing had been left behind. Came back to the meat locker to log the remaining inventory before loading it. I don't have a clean explanation for why I pulled the latch before I'd finished the inventory count. The contents were already logged. There was no operational reason to open it, and I had maybe 40 minutes of daylight left that I didn't want to burn standing in front of an open freezer. I stood in front of the latch and pulled it anyway. I've thought about this since, and I have stopped trying to find any explanation that satisfies me. He was in the far corner, crouched down, his back against the metal wall. His jacket was gone. His feet were bare. He was in a commercial freezer in sub-zero temperatures with nothing on him, and his skin looked less damaged by the cold than it should have, which took me a moment to register, and then a moment more to set aside. His hands were pressed flat against the floor, and his fingertips were stripped raw. The skin was peeled back from the tips in long strips that ran toward the first knuckle. The damage looked like it had originated from inside, something pressing outward through the skin, rather than anything abrading from the outside. His mouth was moving, his jaw working in a slow, rhythmic way around something that wasn't there. I stood in the open doorway with my hand still on the latch. The cold came off the interior of the locker and off him, and hit my face, and I did not move. The ambient temperature outside was already below freezing, and the cold coming off him was distinctly colder than the air around me, which is not how ambient cold works. And I registered this and held the latch and did not move. He raised his eyes to me, the same quality, dry, fixed, the focus directed past my face at something positioned behind me. He looked at me for just a second and his jaw stopped moving. His expression was the same expression of someone who had seen something coming for a long time and is now watching it arrive. Then, the message came through. I've tried to find a better word than message. Impression? Sensation? Transmission? And message is still the most accurate because it had the directed intentionality of something sent from somewhere toward somewhere. It moved through my chest at first, up through my sternum, and into the back of my throat. And it arrived as a language before I'd consciously processed it as sound. Present in the bones before the mind caught up. Clear and simple and complete.
You don't have to run anymore.
By the time I exhaled, the corner was empty. The locker was empty. I was standing with my hand on the latch, looking at a place where something had been. I locked it. I loaded my vehicle. I drove home in the remainder of the afternoon light with both hands on the wheel. And somewhere between the forest road and the country highway, I realized I'd been gripping hard enough that both hands ached when I finally, consciously loosened them. That was 9 days ago. I've been sleeping on the couch. The bedroom window faces north, and I've found that I prefer not to face it when I'm trying to sleep, and I've stopped interrogating that preference. The couch faces a wall, and that feels like enough of a distinction to matter, though I'm aware it shouldn't. Something comes to the north window sometime between midnight and 2. I've marked it on 5 of the 9 nights since I've been home, which may mean I missed it on the other 4, or may mean it wasn't there. It doesn't try the glass or the latch. It positions itself outside and breathes. Slow, deep, steady. And the sound of it comes through the window clearly enough to hear from another room in the quiet house. 3 nights ago, I realized my own breath had synced with it at some point during the night. I don't know when it started. I noticed it mid-exhale, lying there in the dark, and recognized the rhythm, and then lay still while trying to work backwards to when my chest had stopped setting its own pace. It hadn't been a decision. It was something I drifted into without marking the drift. The way you drift into sleep and can't identify the moment of crossing over. I moved the couch that night, which put 2 walls between me and the north window. It didn't help. I can still hear it from here. Patient, slow, right on the other side of the glass. And my chest still moves with it when I stop paying attention. The end. Welcome in, or welcome back to the end of the video. We have yet another terrifying camping story from Pentyworth223. The Wendigo distribution system chose our main character and many others. Big no thank you. At least the thing is staying outside of their house. Does that mean it considers tents to not be houses? Or did it deem the forest as fair game to any trespassers on its land? I don't know the ins and outs of Wendigo logic. Should fix that, honestly. But if I was mid-shower and saw that thing just vibing outside the glass, hell nah. The mental image alone is no. No. What did you think of the story? Do you think there's really anything out there like that? It reminds me a lot of the Blair Witch Project. A lot of similarities, a lot of differences though. Oh, and I'll leave a link to the last story I covered by Pentyworth in the description as well as at the end of the video, if you're in the mood for more camping nightmares. Hey, I should turn that into a playlist. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it, or dislike it if you didn't. I upload once a week, every week, so don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you next Saturday. Bye.